I'm going to introduce tonight's topic, which is media and how cycling is presented in media. The format of tonight is going to be Deborah Madden, I'll introduce in a second, is going to give a wee bit of an introduction. Then we're going to break into, I think, 3 different groups. For about 10-15 minutes, kind of going to break out, have a chat on topics. Deborah's going to move between the groups. Then we're going to come back together to kind of discuss what we've found, what we've liked, disliked, things like that. And then we'll have a bit of Deborah will give a bit of wrap up at the end. And then if any questions people have, they can ask that then at the end. And then if people want to, we often stop recording. I meant to say, actually, tonight's meeting is being recorded. It's been recorded. So anyway, any problem with that, you let you know now. And at the end of the meeting, we'll stop recording, and people want to stay on just for an informal chat. Mairead has the wine out already, so if you want to have a wine or a beer or whatever, pull that out too. If you want to stay for an informal chat or a bit of a decompression over a good or bad cycling experience, we'd love to see you at the end. Okay, so finally, I'll introduce Deborah here. Deborah is the Programmes Officer in Cycling Ireland, and she's director of a programme called Get Ireland Cycling. And Deborah's involved in the media charter for Ireland, and that's what this meeting here about is tonight. And without further ado, I'll hand you over to Deborah Madden.
Hello, how are you? Yeah, I've got a little introduction for myself, and I'm kind of just repeating myself now from you, Ellen, but I'll try not to talk too much so we can get into the workshop end of the night, because that's what I'm kind of hoping to get your feedback on what I'm working on at the minute. So as Ellen said there, I work in Cycling Ireland. I run a programme called Get Ireland Cycling, yet to launch, imminently launching. And as part of it, I want to create a media charter, and that's, by media charter, I mean something that for media outlets and organisations to sign up to. So it's to kind of challenge that anti-cycling, anti-cyclist rhetoric that can often appear in the media, and just a more fair and just way of speaking and reporting on cyclists and cycling, to kind of humanise cyclists and cycling, and to kind of reduce the dangerisation of cycling that happens in the media at the minute. So why bother doing it? What's the point? So many people are after taking up cycling during COVID. I think it was over 500,000 people got on their bikes during COVID. So there's a huge demand for creating it. It's really important, I think, to create a safer environment for everybody if you can. Negative media coverage about cycling influences attitudes to cycling safety and cyclist safety, and stops people, especially those from marginalised communities, from cycling and engaging with cycling. I'm even thinking about getting on it. It dehumanises cyclists. Often they're not seen as people, but cyclists are kind of a human-free group that break red lights and ride 3 abreast and do all the, are answerable for all the badness and ills that happen out on the road. And reporting on collisions is often quite problematic, like car hits cyclists. So you have these autonomous vehicles going around mowing people down, etc., etc., etc. So it's a way of kind of being a bit more humane about how these things are spoken about. It's often mentioned, there's quite a lot of victim blaming that happens in the media when cycling is discussed, especially collisions. The cyclist was wearing dark clothing, they weren't wearing a helmet, etc. So all of that kind of thing, and it kind of absolves the driver of their own responsibility of the vehicle. And it kind of puts all of the emphasis on safety towards the most vulnerable road user. Despite the fact that all the evidence points towards larger, faster vehicles being most frequently involved in incidents. Overstating the risks of cycling. The dangerisation of cycling is something that I think is a real issue now at the moment. It's kind of getting a bike, you're going to die, you're going to just get mown down immediately by everything else that's on the road. And it's a real them and us rhetoric that's there at the moment. So it's I guess, I think it'd be great to challenge that a little bit and give media options, like a different way to think about speaking about cycling, kind of offer a different vocabulary for how they can approach cycling and cyclist issues. So I guess there's a few challenges, I suppose, in this, and a big one is that there's an economic element to, or aspect to, negative cycling reporting. It generates more clicks. If you see an article about, a driver and car on car accident, there's very few comments underneath it. If a cyclist is involved, the comment section kind of lights up, and it becomes a very anti-cyclist, victim blaming, kind of not a nice place to be. And it also, the charter has to be more of an invitation than a demand. So this is something that we want media organisations to willingly sign up to. We're offering them an opportunity to a different vocabulary for speaking about things, rather than quit saying, you know, this, quit being, it's kind of being less defensive and less emotional about it, and more kind of generous in offering another way of speaking, something that they'll want to sign up to, which is key, I think, for the success of it. Most people identify as drivers, so over 80% of cyclists are drivers, but only 10% of drivers are cyclists. So there is a kind of a difference or a difficulty in how to identify or even empathize with cyclists. So I think that's a bit of a challenge too, to kind of overcome with it. And the over-identification with drivers in the media, you know, like speed traps and things like that. Comments under articles about drivers crashing into pedestrians or other drivers. Yeah, I just said that. But the over-identification with a driver, and the kind of absolution that goes with that, or abdication of the responsibility that goes along with that too. So, I mean, there's obvious benefits to it. I suppose there's like making cycling safer for everyone. There's environmental benefits, and it's opening cycling up to like underrepresented communities, or those who feel unsafe or you know, like not protected on the road. So the last point I will fire at you before I introduce the idea of the workshop and stuff is that the language. So it has to be really particular, the language that we use and how we pitch it to the media. It's something, again, as I said before, the media want to buy into. It's an education, not an edict, you know, type of a thing. Again, all the obvious stuff, like looking at the language, collision instead of crash, the car lorry, you know, removing the autonomous vehicle aspect of it from reporting, and see that the Rachel Aldred, I was just chatting to you beforehand, Ellen, about the collisions charter that they have in the UK, that there's buy-in from the AA, British Cycling Transport for London, and that's the kind of similar thing that we need for the Irish kind of media charter, something that I'm looking for, like different, not just cycling organisations, that everybody who's on the road, everybody who shares this space sees the value in and the reasons why this is important, you know. Because it kind of impacts on everyone's safety, that we're all here together, and that we need to empathise and share, and all the lovely obvious things that we would like to happen but don't in our you know, neoliberal capitalist hellhole that we exist in. So so there's we're breaking into 3 groups now, 3 different groups with 3 different headings. So I'm hoping to kind of pick your brains a little bit about what you'd like to see in the media charter. So there's 3 groups. One is, do you think it's necessary and why? The second one is, what needs to be in it, in your opinion? And the third one is language. How do you approach that? How do you approach the kind of language element of it? So if there's no questions, we can belt into the breakout rooms. I think Connor, yeah, people can present from each group what they kind of spoke about, or the main points of each one. So I guess we'll start with do you think this is necessary and why? Whoever the moderator was for that, if you want to kick off.
Mairead, you're on mute there, sorry. Yeah.
Oh, you're on mute, Mairead, yeah.
Still on mute.
Still on mute. I wonder, can I unmute you? No.
Yeah, I have it. Sorry, thanks. Yeah, no, I was too busy typing to get into the thing. So if you forgive me now, I'm going to have to say goodbye to you all for a second, and exit full flip. Sorry, just bear with me. Exit full screen till I get back to my document and talk about it. So we were talking about is a media charter necessary and why. So definitely it's necessary, no doubt about it, and why we need an industry standard for sensitive reporting of people on bikes for transport. Accurate reporting matters. Good reporting can help society to better understand the problems and potential solutions to reduce road danger. Dehumanizing, especially in the comments on, you know, in the online comments on things that are said. Why not say person coming home from work? And we need to recenter the conversation, because the national media has a negative bias towards cycling. Headlines can be very negative towards people cycling, and there's an awful lot of sympathy for the motorists, even though they're not necessarily the majority of society. And then you've got the titles going around, things like drive time, that, you know, we should think about a better vocabulary for people getting around. And we're also conscious that it's all influenced by advertising revenue from the motor industry, but maybe there's other advertising revenue that might be important. So we should look at how other organisations have managed to change the language. And we mentioned the suicide charities, mental health charities, overseas development aid. So they've changed the language that people use. So we no longer talk about people committing suicide as if it's a crime. We talk about people dying by suicide. So, and that took effort. So we should look at that, and we should use sensitive language that's human-centred, and we have to get buy-in from all sorts of people. One suggestion was that we contact the NUJ, and it was noted that the UK Charter was done in partnership with the NUJ, which, as everybody knows, is a joint British-Irish organisation. So we should follow the UK example. And that, you know, if you get the individual journalists on board, that you can have influence at a local level. And then we had some academics from NUIG, who we think would be quite influential, Kelly Fitcham and Andrew O'Boyle. And then with a number of journalists that we think could be influential, Coleman O'Sullivan, Roisin Ingle, Colin McQuillan, Conor Pope, and they're in Dublin, and Claudia Dalby of the Dublin Inquiry. But there's also, and we need more provincial people, there's also Darrell Bradley of the Connaughton City Tribune, who's quite influential in the NUJ, and Denise McNamara of the Connaughton City Tribune. We should use our cyclist.ie contacts with local radio and local journalists to try and influence the conversation. And we have to talk about more people on bikes for more journeys. And the Charter needs to raise awareness that the cycling demographic is a significant group of people in society, and that they can influence things like advertising and voting. And we note that cyclists tend to be in the social demographics ABC1, which are more influential than other demographics. That's it, I think, unless anybody wants to add anything that I missed.
You've nothing to say now.
Yeah, I think that's really comprehensive and useful. That's great.
Yeah, it's all in the shirt.
It was all in the wine.
Yeah.
I think the next group were who needs to be included. So who the moderator for that, was that yourself, Ellen, or
was that who or what needs to be included?
What needs to be included? Yeah.
Just,
that was yourself, Vinny. Sorry.
Okay, well, it was either of us. Do you want to take it, Ellen, or are you happy for me to carry on with it? Yeah, I can't hear you anyway, so you're only chatting about yourself. So I'll fire away. So yeah, we talked about what needs to be included in the Charter, and some very good suggestions there from Anne, from Reg, and good perspectives as well. And obviously the first one, which we've already mentioned, is around language guidance, how to speak about incidents where cyclists or people who cycle are involved, right? And it all becomes a bit of a mouthful after a while. I think you'll all agree, but Maria's example there around, she mentioned earlier, is a good one there. So we're talking about, is it an accident? No, it's a collision, or is it something else, right? And we talk about cyclists versus the car, or the cyclist versus the driver. Why do we always talk about what they're wearing? Doesn't matter what you're wearing. These sort of guidance for people in the media when they're talking about it. And then, sorry, there's a comment here about big media talk. It actually should be in the next section. Let's go to there, but that's an interesting one. So there's stuff around language. Obviously, language is very important. And one thing actually we didn't cover, just to think about it, is we didn't think about the positive language we should be using as well. So it's all we've been focusing a little bit on the negative there. So we should be positive. So let's put that up there. And then we also want balanced views in the media, right? So I think, again, all very negative. There's a lot of click/ear bait headlines. You could see them anywhere. And cyclist destroys half of Dublin or something like that. And then you drill into it and it's nothing like the case. There was a comment around big media talk. So this is the language used on radio, talk shows and all this sort of stuff. And how they talk down to cycle, or people who even have opposing views to whatever, the motor industry or whoever it is on the other side. And it becomes very easy to polarize the debate. So it definitely becomes an us versus them thing. And that's what the media feeds on. That there needs to be some guidance on addressing that. Because, even though cyclists are salad-eating weirdos, and they're not like the rest of us, right? They still need a voice. And they should be presented as people. And their perspective should be taken into consideration. And also we need to talk about bike infrastructure as being social infrastructure. And it's important that if you're building a greenway, it's as important as if you are putting a motorway between Cork and Limerick, right? And that's the way it should be thought about. And there's very little cognizance of that. And then advertising is talked about, of course. Car companies are big advertisers, big sponsors of the likes of the Late Late Show, big sponsors in the newspaper. How do you get around that? I don't know. Is there advertising guidelines? Maybe there is. And then we talked about social media, what you can do with those. And Deborah made a suggestion that, you know, try shame the big media companies, social media companies deciding not to the charter. And then also just as well, there was somebody mentioned around articles online, and the comments under those articles can be absolutely toxic as well, and there doesn't need to be any moderation. So that's some of the things we think should be in charter.
Yeah, I think that's great, and I think it all makes loads of sense. What's great about this for me anyway is input. Like, I mean, I guess the bike infrastructure, social infrastructure, the kind of positive messaging, all of that kind of thing is quite important, you know, in what's out there, what can be out there, and how it can be said. So yeah, and I think, you know, with the advertising and stuff like that, that this is not in opposition to anything, or this isn't a threat to any kind of economic input. It's offering them the chance to speak in a more balanced and fair way. So I think, yeah, hopefully the language, the next one, will help us answer the question on how we can get around that, or how we can speak about it, or how, you know, what needs to be said can be said on that front. So we might hop into the next group, if that's all right. I think that was yourself, Colin. You're on mute there. Oh, no, you're
Mute it now.
okay. Yeah, no, we can hear you.
Yeah. Well, yeah. So we had a good chat there about language. How can it be said? And I guess we kept coming back to focus on interests. You know, general positions, not positions, individual positions, but general holistic positions. So we all want, like, a wish to travel safely, to get to our destination, regardless of mode. I didn't use the phrase, but I thought the Vision Zero is very appropriate. You know, somewhere like Oslo, as a city, is aiming for 0 road deaths a year, regardless of how you meet your death. So that we need to be thinking more about that. Like, it's a humanizing the instances of accidents, not based on it's more their fault because they were cyclists, you know, or less fault because the driver was in a hurry to get to work or something like this. So that was James' point. Anya had very good points. Recent article in the Irish Times from someone who's not necessarily a big cyclist, Emer McLeod. I think I skimmed over it. It went around on Twitter recently, but the positive memories and sides of riding a bike from childhood memories are often outweighed by more recent experiences. And, you know, I think a lot of people now driving, I think Anya mentioned the figure of only 10% of Irish people have experienced cycle as well. And I pointed out in the Netherlands, of course, we have Dutch people love their cars, but they always have a great understanding of cyclists. They have this amazing curriculum in school where they have to do a cycling test by 12 and get a certificate, and then they can cycle. So more than likely, when you're cycling on a road, you're going to meet a driver who's done this test, who understands the issues. So we have to, as Deborah was saying, get her over this perception of cyclists being impediments, more empathetic language, balancing our commercial and human concerns, changing the whole culture pertaining to cycling. It's not that you're cycling because you're a loser, you haven't made your fortune. It's because you actually probably recognize the benefits, the utility, the ease of getting around the city, the health benefits, physical and mental. And we certainly need to link, you know, these new phrases like active travel with cycling, as Barney was saying, because we need to modify our language. We need to normalize, I think would be the right way to say, cycling is normal. Choosing active travel is normal. Sitting in a car, breathing in your own fumes and getting fat is not normal. It should not be normal. It's a recent development, you know. So then we need to, obviously, city development plans are biased towards driving, bring in a more holistic approach to designing our cities. I think some work has begun here. Particularly, we've shot ahead with, say, the COVID mobility routes, and the COVID has certainly advanced some mobility issues. We've probably done more in the last 2 years than we've done in the last 10 years, certainly in Dublin anyhow. And we've seen amazing examples of European cities that have just brought COVID into a savior of active travel, and Paris, even London, places that weren't traditionally associated with cycling, Milan, all sorts of places. So, and then we were talking about an example of leading by example, rather. I believe there is a school that is reopening or opening, being restored next week in Galway, and a minister in charge of active travel has actually forced the kids not to cycle to school that day because they need room for the marquee and the speeches. So we have a real disconnect here. So I think that's kind of sums up where we're at. So the language of promoting something that is, say, active travel and then not leading by example is a real missing link. So language, changing culture, perception of cycling, that is normal. And I think, you know, once again, to focus on the problems caused by issues with bikes are not the fault of bikes. It's more a holistic approach. So I think that sums it up.
Yeah, I think that's great. I think like all of these three elements, and that they may not be like the pillars of it, so to speak, but they're all like what I think needs to be said and needs to be heard with it. I'm like, this is a very early stage. I think there was one of the groups talking about bringing in journalists and media people in at the beginning, and I think that's really key. So I'm trying to get as many eyes on this and as much consultation on it as possible. So that's kind of what tonight is about. It'll definitely be continuing on into the future, you know. It's something that I think has to be done properly and well, and is quite considered, you know. I don't want to like fire something out as a demand that's kind of not fully gestated yet, to use a really disturbing metaphor. But yeah, I think the more eyes, the better. The more generous it can be to everybody, you know, people on bikes, people off bikes. You know, it has to kind of speak to everybody, and that's the kind of key. That's what's not happening at the minute, I think. You know, this is very divisive, very, and I think it might be partly due to habit, time, space. You know, so does anyone have any questions for me, or any? Do you want to give out about anything or not?
Well, I've two wee things I want to kind of, two things that popped into my mind just from people talking there about two particular cases of reporting I remember that irked me at the time. One was, I don't know if you remember, about a few years ago, a central bank employee was killed on his way home on was it Clanbasil Street? Patrick Street, and by a taxi driver. And the taxi driver said he was walking his bike and he just fell in front of him. And people kind of got into a knot about deciding whether he was a pedestrian or whether he was a cyclist because he was walking his bike. And it turns out, I think in the end, the taxi driver was convicted, and actually he lied about what happened. But the fact that whether the man was walking his bike or cycling his bike made a difference to people. The point is, he was hit by a vehicle and he was killed. And people got down, were bothered by the fact that he's walking or cycling. And the other thing I've seen in multiple reports, and it's more about the court system, is motorists, people who are driving, get off because the sun was in their eyes and they didn't see a person on a bike in front of them. And that is an absolute bugbear of mine. If you can't see what's in front of you, you stop, you put down your visor, you put on your glasses. If you're driving blind, you're a danger. And it's not a mitigating circumstance. The sun is low on the horizon every winter for 4 or 5 months of the year. It's not a surprise. Everyone should be prepared for that. And I don't know why that is seen as an excuse that it wasn't his fault, he couldn't see. If you couldn't see, you shouldn't have been driving. It's like getting into a car with frost on your windscreen and go, oh, I don't have time for the frost to clear, I'm going to drive, I hit someone, oh, but there was frost on my windscreen. That wouldn't be seen as acceptable. So they're two ranting bugbears of mine, but the cases where it didn't matter whether he's walking or cycling, and it didn't matter that the sun was low on the horizon. That was, you shouldn't have, those things, they're not excuses. They're not excuses for what happened. So there, I've said my piece.
Bringing it back to the human as well, isn't it? You know, it's setting a precedent for, oh, the sun was in the rise, and that becomes, like you're saying, a mitigating excuse, when actually, if you can't see where you're going, you shouldn't be driving. It's very basic and very simple, no matter what mode of transport. You know, if you're on your bike and you can't see, if you're in a motorbike, if you're in whatever it is, you know, if you can't see what's in front of you, you shouldn't be pulling into everyone. So, and I think, again, getting into a knot about, are they a pedestrian, are they cyclists? You know, there's different levels of sympathy that are owed to the victim in those circumstances, which is just kind of wrong. I see John Turner has his hand up there. I don't know if he can. Can I unhand you? I don't think I can. No.
Jeez, I was awful official. I was awful official altogether, Deborah.
Yeah, let you go, Reg John Turner.
Come here. The one thing I was just thinking of there when we were all sort of chatting there. I work with the ambulance service there in Galway City. I don't know, can you reach out to Deliveroo or one of them, because some of the cyclists working for those companies, I'm not sure what they're like in Dublin, but around Galway City, they are absolute maniacs. So it's just totally crazy. Electric bikes modified to the last, and they're driving around at 50k. Like, it's just, now again, enforcement, Gardaí, that kind of stuff. But if we're putting together a charter, I don't know, can we get Deliveroo and Just Eat on board to make sure that they're, I know they're not technically their employees, but they're going around with the Deliveroo bags, like, and that kind of stuff. So I don't know. I think they're an element that can't be left out.
Right, I think this is about reporting of how people might move, rather than the actual. I think actually an intervention to change how a particular group of people use their bikes, as like a particular group of sector in the economy that works. I think that's a separate issue than what is actually being discussed this evening. Not belittling that or saying there's a need there, but I'm saying it's actually separate to what a media charter for reporting collisions, injuries, deaths, people using bikes for transport every day.
Yeah, I think it's a road safety issue, really, you're talking about there. Do you know, like, as opposed to what, and it will be great to educate everybody on how to use the roads, share the road safely, do you know, because it's everyone's responsibility for everybody else on the road too. And there's different levels of responsibility. Obviously, if you're driving like a lorry or whatever, your levels of responsibility are different to if you're a child walking to school. But definitely it sounds like there is, or there are road safety issues and education issues there. But like Martina was saying there, like, this charter is quite specific, and it's kind of just about offering the media a chance to have a different language or a different way of thinking about cyclists and cycling, and how they use that language, how they describe cyclists and cycling, and how they can, you know. So I think maybe that might be something you can look at in the future, but we're just trying to be really specific, you know.
I have one suggestion, actually, is, and it might be slightly, I'm not sure people might feel about, but I'd actually almost like us to see us move away entirely from using the word cyclist to describe people who use their bikes for transport, because the English language only has one word to describe a person on a bicycle-shaped object, and I use it very, very differently from how Sam Bennett uses his bike. And I think that's a large part of the confusion. Like in Dutch, there are two words. There's even athlete, sports athlete bike user, and a transport bike user. So the language in and of itself kind of tells you a bit more about why somebody is cycling, and you can then infer from that distance, range, fitness, and a whole other different kind of factors that make up our individuals' experiences. But personally, as the person who kind of leads a communications Galway cycling campaign, I don't type the word cyclist. I don't say the word cyclist unless I absolutely have to. And I might be caught in the hot bandwagon, but I will talk about people on bikes, people using bikes, people moving on bikes, choosing to their bikes. So the idea that we are people and not others, because there's so much of what we talked about today, and the language is about the othering, and we're talking about, we've been talking about like feeling dehumanized and dehumanizing language. That's not something kind of glossing over. That's really, really significant. So I think calling ourselves people on bikes, people using bikes, highlights our humanity, first of all, and also the use of this object, because some of us do go out for 100K club spins at the weekend for fitness, or want to take massive, charity rides, or want to cycle across Spain for the holidays. Vast majority of us are really trying to cycle between 2 and 7 kilometers from our front door to go to school, to sports, to shops, to cinema, to the local sports pitch, with our families, with the people that we love, and to be using it for journeys that really don't take more than 20 minutes. And I think that's vastly different from somebody's going out for 5-6 hours on a Saturday morning.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. And for me, I actually don't see that division. And obviously, I know I'm cycling around, I wouldn't, but I mean, for example, I race my bike, right? I've been national champion a couple of times, but I also commute on my bike. And I feel like I should be just as protected as if I'm going on a training spin, as if I'm going to the shops, or if I'm going out of town to meet my friend. I think that having different words for cyclists, it's divisive. It kind of splits people up. I would be more kind of trying to think about everybody,
I would say this actually division is actually a benefit, because it more accurately describes the type of person and their reason for using this particular object.
I mean, and my point, I suppose, is that I will be someone who is both. And I think there's a lot of people who are both, and there's not like one type of person who's this kind of cyclist and that. I mean, when you get into that, there's 1,000 different ways to, there's mountain bikers, there's BMX kids, there's 1,000 different ways to define, and if it's just cycling to the shops, that's also for fitness. You do that, you cycle to work because you want to, you've had a heart scare, or, there's 1,000 different ways and reasons people get on bikes. And I think that,
but sorry, Deborah, I'm going to drill down here and say, like, there's a difference between and motivation of why you use your bike. But I'm talking about the purpose of the bike. There's a difference between people who want to cycle 2 kilometers to school and people who want to cycle for 100 kilometers once a week.
Yeah.
And by using one word to describe these two very different purposes, even though they might share the same intent of fitness and health, and lung health in particular, that can be confusing for people who do neither, don't care about either, and in particular have one image in their head, which often is a person dressed in lycra. And that's very different from, particularly us here in the kind of the everyday cycling advocacy community. This is why we advocate, and this is why we spend our evenings, our weekends, our weekdays talking about road safety, because we're using our bikes between 2 and 5K from home most of the time, a lot of us. And that's very different from people using as their bikes for a particular sporting activity. Even though our intent might be the same, our behavior is different, and how we're perceived, unfortunately, it is different. So perhaps in this instance, a division of a language which more accurately describes a behavior might be more helpful.
Yeah, I suppose for me, the kid who's cycling to school, it could also be the child who's doing 100K at the weekend with their club, and I think that no one group is more deserving of protection or more deserving of advocacy than another, no matter what their intent is. Do you know what I mean? So like people on bikes are, like you're saying, we're all humans, we're people. We're not trying to separate someone out. We're not trying to say, that's you over there, you're nothing to do with us. We use it for utility, we use it for leisure, we use it for exercise, we use it for work, we use it for commuting. We're all So, and you can be in all of those different groups at the same time, like myself, you know, and like many kids. I mean, I track racing is my discipline, you know, when there's kids on track at 7 years of age, you know, and there's people in their 70s up to 80s, you know, racing on track. So like, I think it's really helpful to humanize all cyclists, not just these are the ones that we need to protect, these are the ones we don't. Everybody needs to, like, I'm just thinking of the last 2 weekends, the 2 deaths in clubs in you know, one was on a group spin in Wexford, another one was at you know, at a cycling event, and their safety on the road is just as important as a kid going to the shop, you know, and instead of drawing a line between all of these different kinds of people, it's thinking about, okay, we are humans on bikes, we're not, and we're trying to advocate for everybody together, you know, and we're all trying to make the road safer for everybody, be they on Lycra, be they on like a balance bike, or, you know.
Absolutely, I think we're absolutely in agreement about what we want. I guess my point is that when you say cyclist, you said cyclists are 100 random people and ask them the first image in their head. That's the thing I want, that I would like to be tackled, and that's why I'm suggesting using the word, or using the term people on bikes might be more inclusive and broader overall.
Definitely.
And it's because the word cyclist has unfortunately become so associated with sporting activities, and that image of like her, and we all know that is not the one or the only.
I'm just going to pop in here because it's a 1:15, and I think we can continue the discussion at the end because it's a great discussion. We said Anne's got her hand up there for her question, and then we need to wrap up and stop the recording part. And if we want to chat afterwards, we can have a great chat. I'm loving the go to and fro. Anne, do you want to pop in there? And then I'm afraid we'll have to wrap up because it's 1:15. You're muted there.
Sorry. I would actually have something to add to Martina, but I can do that later as well. Because I do think it's got loads to do with associations as well. And if we think about the cyclist in Lycra who's heading out at the weekends, we automatically people would associate that with a healthy person, with someone who can like quite different from vulnerable people, elderly people cycling in the city, or kids cycling in the city. So I can see the point there to make the distinction. I have another point though. We talked in the group about changing the perspective through the media as well, and given like to allow readers of newspapers to like get the perspective of a cyclist. And I'm wondering whether like a way to do that and to prevent this divisive mood that is our polarized atmosphere, whether it would be good to emphasize that actually there are loads of benefits for the overall community if people cycle. So even motorists would benefit from clearer air, from better air, from more space overall on the road, climate change, loads of issues. So yeah, maybe to put a stronger emphasis on the overall benefits. Yeah, that would be my addition there.
I think you're absolutely right. I think what's missing is that kind of positive message. You know, the only thing that's reported in the media is, you know, deaths, collisions, red light breakers. It's always very negative, and you know, it benefits, like you're saying, literally, it benefits drivers to cycle. It benefits the entire society to cycle. I think I was talking in a group before that all of the national development plans, they all mention, you know, a necessity for a modal shift towards cycling, but yet it's reported so negatively. So there's definitely a need to challenge that 100%, 110%. And I totally agree with like saying people on bikes rather than cyclists, because, you know, there are associations, there is kind of the inhuman negative kind of, so I think we're all people on bikes, and that's what needs to happen, you know, in the same way that like cars become autonomous, cyclists become autonomous in the same way, and it needs to come back to the human. It absolutely does.
Well, that was a great discussion. Deborah, thanks so much for coming along tonight. It was a really great discussion. I think we all got to vent a bit too, which I think is very important, and to make some concrete suggestions. I think everyone really enjoyed it. I said if you want to come along again any other time, or come back and tell us how you got on, how you progressed, that'd be really brilliant. So that's
Next
it for
year there'll
tonight.
be only positive reporting myself.
Only
So, yeah.
Okay, so if anyone wants to stay on for, we'll start recording now, from now, I suppose, really. And if anyone wants to stay on for